while there is an annual valuation date, there is nothing in real property tax law that compels municipalities to reassess and to keep this distribution fair on a periodic basis. So within New York State, there are some municipalities that actually do this process annually, which you could consider to be the gold standard. Probably, 25 to 30% of municipalities in New York currently reassess every year, and there is technology and means for them to do that so that it's a cost-efficient process. On the other extreme, there are some municipalities that have not reassessed in decades. There is one municipality in Westchester County that last reassessed prior to the Civil War. So, again, the town of Goshen has seen fit to do this periodically, as Supervisor Bloomfield mentioned. Goshen last did this in 1998, and we certainly commend the town for having the commitment to good government, because that's really what maintaining a set of equitable assessments is all about, ensuring this fair distribution. We commend the town for embarking on this process. And this slide, without belaboring it, when municipalities don't reassess, or when there is not a reassessment for many, many years, not only does it create unfairness, some properties will pay more than what they should, others will pay less than what they should, but it becomes very, very hard, as the supervisor referenced, to understand the system. And of course, the less you understand it, the less you're able to determine whether or not you're being fairly assessed and whether your taxes are accurate. And because there's this lack of a regular standard for reassessment, that's where we as the state come in, having to produce equalization rates so that there can be a relatively fair distribution of property tax in school districts and at the county level, where you have more than one municipality as an entity making up those groups. So without further ado, we've got two slides here that try to present a generic picture as to why reassessment is necessary. And the first one here, the values are okay, but in this premise, this community last reassessed in 1979. The Smith home and the Jones home, both back in 1979, were valued at $50,000, and they were assessed at $50,000. So, the town collected $1,000 in tax. The average tax rate was 2%. So the point here is that based on their value of $50,000, they were fairly assessed. Their assessment on the town's books reflected their value, and they both paid taxes on that amount. And again, we're going to assume here, just to keep things simpler, that neither of these properties had any exemptions, because exemptions add another layer of potential confusion to this whole, are my taxes fair? It's certainly possible for two properties to be fairly assessed, but if one property enjoys an exemption, whether it's a senior citizen or a veteran or something else, a comparison of the tax bills could lead someone to think that something's wrong here. So again, the standard has to be, how are these properties assessed? What are the indicated market values? And if the values are really appropriate, do the assessments reflect that? So, okay, so here we have the beginning picture. If we go to the next slide, we look at the situation 30 years later. Obviously, property values have increased. For whatever the reason, the Smith home is now worth $300,000. The Jones home is now worth $200,000. But if we take a look at the assessments, they're both still assessed at $50,000. So, if the town is now collecting, a 10% tax rate, they're both paying $5,000, but when you look at the real tax rate, which is the percentage that the taxes represent of the value of the home, the Smith home is paying about 1 2/3%. The Jones home is paying about 2.5%. Bottom line here is that one property, the Smith home, I should say, is getting a deal. They're actually paying less taxes than they should based on their value, because their assessment does not appropriately reflect the market value. The Jones home is actually paying more than they should because their assessment represents a higher market value than it's actually worth. And that's really the nutshell of what reassessment is all about. Reassessment is simply intended to realign the town's assessments, the values on the town's books, on the town's roll, with current market values. Now, why is this critical? And let's take the town of Goshen briefly, without, my intent here is not to point out specific properties, but the town last did a project like this in 1998. I think everyone would agree that since 1998, property values have changed. They went up for a period, they went down. And more specifically, while property values have gone up and down, I think everyone would agree that not all properties have increased or decreased at the same uniform rate. There's going to be variation depending on the type of home, the type of property, the amenities, the location of the property in the town, and a variety of other circumstances. And because properties do not tend to appreciate or depreciate at the same rate across the board throughout a town, that's why it's necessary to periodically go in and realign values. Say, what's the value as of the valuation date? And let's make sure our assessment appropriately reflects that. And again, bottom line, it's all about ensuring fairness so that the property tax is then distributed on the basis of the right value for each person's property. So we go on to the next, well, we've kind of hit on this already. Reassessment, what is it? What does it do? Essentially, reassessment is a comprehensive review of all properties throughout the town in which assessments are set back to market value. And again, I've said this before, but it's worth repeating. The more time that's elapsed from the previous reassessment, the more likely it is that some property owners are paying more than they really should, while others are paying less than they really should. And what ends up happening is those properties that are under-assessed, so to speak, all of the other property owners in the town are essentially subsidizing those properties. Part of their taxes are going to support those properties when by rights those folks really shouldn't be paying. Again, it's all about fairness. That's the overriding purpose for doing the reassessment. As the supervisor mentioned, in doing that, in making the assessments or in aligning the assessments with property value, it makes this a little bit easier for us as property owners to understand, are we being fairly assessed? We don't have to convert a fractional assessment to market value. So again, hopefully it makes it a little easier for us to determine, is the assessment fair? An important point is that reassessment is essentially tax neutral. This is a common misconception. What I mean by this is that the act of reassessment does not increase taxes. Now, to be fair, yes, there is always some cost associated with doing a reassessment. So to whatever degree or to whatever amount the town pays for a reassessment project, obviously that gets worked into the town budget. Yes, you could say there is a cost to that, but the point really here is that the act of reassessment does not cause the county, the town, the school, the village, the special districts to say, this is a reason for us to raise our budget. Going back to how we started out, taxing jurisdictions establish the amount of money they need each year independently. So again, this is really all about distribution, fair distribution. Joanne can probably speak better than I can to the issue of whether the town has a large number of certiorari's or tax-related lawsuits, but certainly it stands to reason that if a municipality has current assessments, the number of lawsuits over assessments is bound to go down, and where you have them, it's going to be easier to defend them because you have more current information. In some cases, having fair assessments can help with economic redevelopment. Sometimes it does spur people to look at commercial properties if they know they're being fairly taxed. We have received information that municipalities that reassess get better bond ratings than those that don't. Local control, it's a subtle point, but it's a very big one. In doing a reassessment, the town takes control over its equalization destiny. As I mentioned a little earlier, we